Here are 7 of the first few SSR characters that are expected to release starting from around the end of the year. This video will give you a brief explanation of all of their respective skill sets and whether or not they are worth pulling for, no matter what type of player you are. So let's get into it. But before we go into the video, I have officially launched my very own Discord server. Joining this server will allow you to interact and ask any questions where the community and myself will be able to answer all of your questions. As well as this, you'll have exclusive access to exclusive Discord emojis, there will be exclusive roles and perks for my future YouTube members, and finally you'll be able to participate in my many future giveaways, which will all be held within my Discord server from now on. So click the link in the description down below or search up the link currently on screen, and I can't wait to see you all there. Now back to the video. So these 7 characters will all be categorized within the Pre-Geryu Era, where I will be going through each one of them in the order I suspect them to be released in. So let's get into the first SSR Plus character. So starting off with this brand new era, we have Bakuzan Plus. So for his attack skills, he attacks a single target with 2 hits for 140% of his attack. And for his ultimate attack, he deals charge damage to a column by 200% of his attack, which can stack for at least 2 times and has a 40% chance to stack up to 3 times. So charge damage is damage being able to pierce through shields, which will be very useful against Bomb's shields. And if you manage to unlock his keepsake, you'll unlock his ultra ultimate attack, where he'll deal charge damage to a column by 300% of his attack, which will have a 100% chance to stack for 3 times, so you'll be doing 900% attack overall. So from this alone, he does sound like a really neat character, but there is a future character who does the exact same thing but is much more stronger, and I will get to that very soon. Anyways, moving on to his passive skills. So before any character's action, he removes attack boost on 3 random enemies, and after his own action, he will reduce the attack of his targets by 40% for 2 rounds. Then if you manage to 5-star him, he will remove the attack boost of 4 random enemies, and he will reduce the attack of his targets by 45% for 2 rounds. And if you manage to unlock his 5-star awakening, he will reduce the attack of his targets by 48% for 2 rounds. And going through his Awakened passive, which is a brand new additional passive that each SSR Plus character has, excluding core units. So after being defeated, he'll revive with 70% of his HP when the next round begins, which can happen 1 time per battle. He also grants Tenacity for his first revival, which those Tenacity shields will provide 50% of his max HP. And if you manage to awaken to him, he will be able to revive up to 2 times per battle, and 70% of his max HP will be granted into his Tenacity shields. So to sum him up, he is a very strong column DPS unit where he will be able to deal 900% of his attack overall if you have his keepsake. Because of his charge damage kit, he will be able to counter Bomb shields pretty effectively. So because of this, he'll counter Bomb shields really well, since Bomb will only be around for like 1 or 2 months before the SSR Plus era begins. And a neat thing about Bakuzan is that he should be released as a free event character, and by that I mean that you will have to do challenges and events in order to get his evolution and awakening stones. So this game will give you the option of whether or not you want to awaken Bakuzan or you want to save those materials for any other monster unit. However, as the very first SSR Plus character, there are a few cons about him. Firstly, he is a grappler, which is a very competitive type, as we all know, especially since Gale Wind will be released around Bakuzan Plus is about to be released. So during Bomb's core, it will be very competitive to have as many grapplers as you can, as Bomb's core needs ones of every type. And as the first SSR Plus unit, he is overpowered by many later SSR Plus units, and because of that, he is the absolute worst SSR Plus units. You should not really summon for him or even awaken him, even for whales. Trust me, he is absolutely dog shit. Anyways, moving on. Should you summon for Bakuzan? So what I am going to say is that please save all of your evolution materials that you gain from this event and save them for a future monster SSR Plus character, as they are way more overpowered than Bakuzan Plus and they'll be more useful in the future and have a long meta than compared to Bakuzan Plus. So realistically, no one should be pulling for him or his keepsake or even awakening to him. But for high spenders, if they do have the money to make up for these free materials, then you can pull for him, but I really wouldn't recommend to get his keepsake or awaken to him, since he is pretty much a waste, and it was very hard for me to find the specific information that his keepsake and 5p passive does, since no one unlocks him in the Southeast Asian servers. But if you want to be very competitive at the very start of the SSR Plus era, then you can do whatever you want. But for everyone else, please do not associate yourself with him at all. Next up, we have Childemperor Plus. So for his attack skills, his basic attack attacks a single target with 2 hits for 120% of his attack. And for his ultimate attack, he attacks all enemies with 5 hits for 250% of his attack. He will also reduce the max HP of the main target by 20% for 2 rounds. And if you manage to unlock his keepsake, his AoE attack will deal 300% of his attack, and he'll reduce the max HP of the main target by 30% for 2 rounds. So basically, he's going to be one of the most, if not the most powerful AoE direct damage units for quite a while, as he can deal up to 300% of his attack to everyone, which is very neat, but his passive is what everyone is looking forward to. So for his passive skills, his regular passive at the start of the battle, he increases crits to the entire row by 25% for 2 rounds. And he will also grant permanent (immunity) against specific debuffs such as burn, force field, injury, and internal injury to the entire row. And going over his awakened passive, at the start of the battle, he will summon one robot dog for 3 rounds, which will deal 100% of Childemperor's attack. So after an ally's action, the robot dog will deal direct damage to the enemy with the lowest HP ratio, dealing 200% of the attack, and he will heal an ally with the lowest HP ratio by 25% HP. And if you awaken to Childemperor, he will be able to summon 2 dogs instead of 1. So to summarize him up, he is a very strong AoE DPS unit, as he will be the best during the Pre-Geryu Era, and he is also a great high-tech unit which is really rare, and he can slot really well within Bob's core as your high-tech unit. He is also a great attacking and support unit due to his passive, as he has his robot dog, as well as him being able to grant immunity to debuffs. And a neat thing about his passive is that it is active even after death, so his dogs will still be able to attack and heal your allies. However, the cons about him is with the counterparts, he has a 50% chance to block dots such as force field. So his immunity is not 100% guaranteed, and it does not include the resistance stat. So the permanent immunity just means that he will grant immunity within the 10 rounds, but will only have a 50% chance of blocking any dot debuffs to the same row as Childemperor. So he will only soft counter dot debuffs. There is also a significant gap with and without his keepsake, so if you do pull for Childemperor, you would ideally want to pull for his keepsake in order to maximize the amount of AoE damage you can deal. His team placement will be very essential for his passive, as it can dictate whether or not people will be granted immunity to certain debuffs, or if you want to prioritize them having higher crits, where some units need to have high crit whilst others need to have a strong resistance, which you will need to decide on. And finally, since he is also one of the first few SSR Plus units, there are better SSR Plus units to save for, so as a free-to-play player, I would recommend to skip for Childemperor, and you should be saving for future SSR Plus characters, but this can be pretty situational if you have been lacking a high-tech unit and you really want to pull for a high-tech unit, which I would recommend to save your tickets until the Geryu Plus era and when his core comes out, since that will be better off. So, should you pull for Childemperor? So for free-to-play and low spenders, you shouldn't be pulling for him at all, so you don't need to worry about his keepsake or to awaken to him. For mid-spenders, I would only advise that you can pull for him if you are in desperate need of a high-tech unit, where you did not pull for Drive Knight and you really want a high-tech unit. However, I would recommend to save your black tickets for future SSR Plus characters that will be very good within the Geryu Plus core, as the high techs that will be good now will not be as useful during the Geryu Plus era, which will drastically change the game. So I would recommend you guys to be playing the long game. But if you do decide to pull for him, then you definitely need to get his keepsake, otherwise he's not really as worth pulling for. And for high spenders, he is a great pull to have with his keepsake, and if you really want to awaken to him, you can, so that you have 2 dogs, which will be very beneficial to healing up your allies and dealing even more damage. However, if you don't want to, then you don't need to awaken to him, he's not that important, but you can pull for him. Next up, we have the much better alternative for Bakuzan Plus, being Boros Plus. So for his attack skills, his basic attack attacks a single target with 2 hits for 140% of his attack. And for his ultimate attack, he attacks enemies in a column with 5 hits for 1300% of his attack. and he ignores the unyielding of the target once if the targets do have it. And if you manage to unlock his keepsake, you'll unlock his ultra ultimate attack, where he attacks enemies in a column with 5 hits for 1500% of his attack, which is absolutely insane. As well as which you'll unlock an additional feature where he will increase the crit damage from this attack by 40%. So you definitely want to pull for his keepsake if you do pull for him, because he will provide the highest DPS damage out there in this game, as of the start of the SSR Plus era. So going through his passive skills, for his regular passive, when allies heal, Boros is healed for 60% of that value, which will trigger up to 6 times per round. If you 5-star him, then he will be healed for 80% of their value and it will trigger up to 7 times per round. And if you unlock his 5-star awakening, he will heal for 85% of that value, which will trigger up to 8 times per round. So now going through Boros' awakened passive, so at the start of battle, he will summon one Dark Matter Thief, which will inherit HP by 1800% of Boros' basic attack. This thief will share 80% of incoming damage for all allies in Boros' row. And after consuming all the HP, he'll deal extra damage by 30% of his max HP to 3 random enemies. And if you manage to awaken 2 Boros, he'll be able to summon 2 Dark Matter Thieves, which the second thief will share 80% of damage for allies in the other row, so both rows will be covered with damage sharing. So this will introduce the new mechanic of damage sharing, which will increase the survivability of your team overall, which is really good. So to summarize Boros, for his pros, he is a super strong column DPS unit where he will be able to deal 1500% of his attack to a column, which is absolutely insane and is much better than Bakuzan Plus. He also negates unyielding of certain enemies once, which is really neat as this is a brand new feature which will ignore one-yielding people such as Garo or Aloy or so forth. Because of his damage sharing passive, he has amazing survivability where he will be able to direct a lot of incoming damage to his entire row from his thieves, so your team will be able to last for a lot longer. So because of this, he is also super strong in PvP and is more prioritized as a PvP unit rather than a PvE unit. So for you PvP players out there, Boros is absolutely essential to get the most out of the PvP meta. So going through his cons, he is an Esper unit, which is also another very competitive type. So you will have to decide if you want to use ATT, RMG or Boros within Bomb's core. He also needs very high investment and his keepsake in order to maximize his damage potential. Also within the next couple of months after his debut, he will be countered by Carnage Kabuto and metalbat. So you will have to look out for that. And finally, there are better espers for Geryu Plus's core, so Boros doesn't really synergize really well with Geryu Plus, so you should keep that in mind if you do intend to play the long game, and you should probably save your black tickets for future SSR Plus espers. So should you pull for Boros? For free to play and low spenders, I would recommend to skip him. For mid spenders, I would probably pull for him since he is really good and he will be very essential for PvP and in bossing, so yes, and definitely get his keepsake if you can pull for him. Otherwise, it is not worth pulling for Boros if you can't pull for his keepsake. And for high spenders, he is a super good character, so you should be pulling for him with his keepsake, and you can decide to awaken too, since it is very beneficial for a pretty long time, as he will be the only damage sharing unit for a fairly long time. So next up is the first absolute must pull, being Carnage Kabuto Plus. So for his attack skills, he attacks a single target with 5 hits for 100% of his attack, and he also deals additional charge damage for 25% of his max HP, which is really good since it scales off his HP and not his attack, so he will be able to do a lot of damage. For his ultimate attack, it's basically the same, where he attacks a single target for 100% of his attack, and he deals additional charge damage for 35% of his max HP. On top of this, he will also trigger Out of Control, where he will launch ultimate follow-up against enemies after their action, which can happen up to 2 times per round. And if you manage to unlock his keepsake, his charge damage amount will be increased from 35 to 45% of his max HP, and a brand new additional buff is that he will continuously heal for 35% of his max HP for 1 round. So think of it as the exact same as Sonic V2 constantly healing himself. That this is a really good feature to have, and his keepsake is highly recommended to pull for. Moving on to his passive skills, so for his regular passive, when he is attacked or defeated, he will reflect 50% of the damage taken to 4 random enemies. Where if you manage to 5-star him, he will be able to reflect 50% of the damage taken to all of the enemies and not 4. And if you manage to 5-star awaken him, he will reflect 60% of the damage taken to all enemies. So he is exactly like his base form, but he's absolutely on steroids, where even if he dies, he will deal damage reflect, which is very essential. And going through his awakened passive, at the start of the battle, he will increase his max HP by 25%, where he will also quadruple his max HP effect, and he will restore 50% of his max HP. So think of it as Geryuganshoop's core, but to himself, which is absolutely insane. And if you manage to awaken to him, he will increase his max HP by 30%, and an additional feature that he will revive with 70% of his HP after being defeated once every battle. So his survivability is absolutely insane. He has so much health and his damage can scale off his HP, which is absolutely phenomenal. So going through his pros and cons, for his pros, he is an amazing tank where he can act as a damage soaker and reflector. And despite being a grappler, he is a great grappler for Geryu Plus's core, where he should be one of your main grapplers for his core, as there are so many benefits to Kabuto and many features of the game, so you should definitely use him in Geryu Plus's core and in Bomb's core. As I've mentioned before, his ult damage deals charge damage scaled from his HP percentage, which like SSR plus Genos or Watchdog Man can deal a significant amount of damage, and especially with charge damage, which will be able to pierce through shields. And a good thing about Carnage is that for all players, even if you are a weaker player or don't have too many sacks, he doesn't need to be overly invested in to be strong, as he does feel as a very great tank for all types of players in the game. And if you do manage to have Watchdog Man, he does synergize really well with health boosting units, as his charge damage scales from HP, so that is a good combo to look out for. However, for his cons, you should try to 5p awaken him to unlock the maximum potential out of him, so you will need to get his keepsake to deal as much damage reflect as possible, since damage reflect in this game is super OP. His PvP meta can be quite short, as he will be countered by future units such as Atomic Samurai and Phoenix Man, but he will still be very useful in PvE for a very long time. And he is also pretty cramped between essential SSR plus units such as metalbat plus and Geryu plus. So for most players, out of the 3 must-haves that I am going to mention, you might need to pull for 2, but I do recommend Carnage Kabuto to be one of these top 2. So should you pull for Carnage Kabuto? It is absolutely essential to pull for Carnage Kabuto, so you need to pull for his keepsake as well, but you don't need to awaken to him, since for free-to-play players you mostly do want to get as many SSR plus characters as possible. For mid-spenders, I would definitely recommend to pull for him and get his keepsake, and if you really want to, you can awaken to him if you did save the evolution materials that you gained from Bakuzan's event, if you don't decide to save those for another additional SSR plus character. Otherwise, he is very good to awaken to. And for high spenders, you should awaken to, you should keepsake, you should pull, you should do everything. He is a very good unit that will be very viable for a pretty long time. Next down the list, we have metalbat plus. So for his attack skills, his basic attack attacks a single target with 3 hits for 150% of his attack. And for his ultimate attack, he attacks a single target with 3 hits for 120% of his attack. On top of which, he deals additional charge damage for 380% of his attack. He also launches consecutive follow-up against the main target and 2 enemies with the lowest HP. So he is going to be spinning absolutely crazy throughout the battle. And if you manage to unlock his keepsake, you will unlock his ultra ultimate attack, where his direct damage will increase from 120 to 150%, and the charge up damage will increase from 380 to 420% of his attack. On top of which, his consecutive follow-up will also target the main target and 3 enemies with the lowest HP, so you'll be able to hit 4 enemies with his follow-up. He also gains the additional feature of being able to heal himself for 12% for every consecutive follow-up. So you will be able to heal up to 48% after hitting 4 enemies with his ultra ultimate attack, which is really neat, and he can deal crazy amounts of damage with these follow-ups. So going through his passive skills, for his regular passive, he grants permanent immunity against stun to all allies in the same row, which doesn't include himself, so just the 2 allies in his row. And from round 3, he'll grant immunity against extra damage to himself. So if you manage to 5-star him, he will be able to grant immunity to stun in everyone in his row, including himself, so up to 3 characters. And from round 2, he'll grant immunity against extra damage to himself. And on top of which, if you do manage to 5-star awaken him, from round 1, he'll grant immunity against extra damage to himself. And for his awakened passive, he will trigger Reborn after being defeated, which Reborn can be triggered up to 3 times, and can even trigger when all of his allies die, which is a very first and is very neat. So what Reborn does is that he does revive for 40% of his HP. Also, when Reborn is triggered, every time he does revive, he launches his consecutive follow-up against one enemy with the lowest HP. And if you do unlock his Awaken 2, he will be able to revive up to 4 times, which he revives up to 70% of his HP every time, and he will be able to launch consecutive follow-ups after he is reborn against 3 enemies with the lowest HP. So he's going to be an absolute tornado on the battlefield. He will be insane for his follow-ups. It is absolutely crazy. So in summary, he is an insane damage unit where he will deal insane amounts of charge damage, and especially through his follow-ups. His kit also provides multiple revives, which even works even when the team is dead, which is a very first, as Phoenix Man and Zombie Man cannot do so. They will need their team to survive. So the battle will not end until all of metalbat's revives have been used. He also has very great synergy with Carnage Kabuto, so you definitely do want them to be in the same team as each other. He is also a great duelist for the training center, where you can make him as a leader or use him against the duelist levels. And he will be very OP in PvP for heroes and in life clash. So the cons with him, much like Childemperor, he has a 50% chance to block stun, so it is not a 100% chance again, so he does soft counter Gale Wind, but he is still very useful for his stun immunity. He also really does need his keepsake and his awakening too, so he requires heavy investment. So you will need to decide if you do want to awaken to him or not. And finally, he is countered by Geryu Plus's core, as his core will protect all allies from death, which will nullify metalbat's consecutive follow-ups since they will not be able to die due to Geryu Plus's unyielding, which I will go over really soon. So it does suck that metalbat will be released like a month or 2 before Geryu Plus, so he will kind of die down pretty quickly, but he will still be super useful in PvE scenarios. So should you pull for metalbat? Now for free to play, he is a very good pull, so I would recommend to pull so, but this situation normally consists of pulling either metalbat or Atomic Samurai, and in my personal preference, I would recommend to definitely pull Atomic Samurai over metalbat if you do not have enough tickets to pull for both of them. So, if you can't pull for metalbat's keepsake, or you don't have enough black tickets to summon both Atomic Samurai and metalbat, I would recommend to skip for metalbat and save your black tickets for later SSR Plus characters. Otherwise, pull for metalbat since he is a great duelist, and if you have been saving up for a duelist for Bomb's Core, then metalbat Plus is definitely a must get. For mid spenders, you definitely need to get for him, and you can decide to awaken to him if you do have enough money to do so. He is very worth getting his awakening 2 for. And for high spenders, you have to get his awakening 2. You have to get everything to do with metalbat. He will be absolutely essential in hero PvP for a very long time, and just in PvP scenarios overall. For our penultimate character and the most important character of them all, we have Geryuganshoop Plus. So for his attack skills, he attacks a single target for 120% of his attack, and for his ultimate attack, he attacks all enemies with 5 hits for 120% of his attack, where the first strike for those inflicted with Specialized Berserk will also deal Berserk damage by 200% of Geryu's attack with a chance to crit, so they will be able to deal additional damage on top of their original damage. This specialized berserk will also consume 150 of the energy gauge every time an enemy takes berserk damage, which 1000 of these energy points equate to 1 energy, which this will last for 1 round. Another neat feature is that this ultimate is also completely free, so it costs 0 energy, which is a neat feature because he does do some decent damage. So if you manage to unlock his keepsake, you will unlock his ultra ultimates, where he will increase his direct AoE damage from 120 to 150% of his attack, and he will be able to grant specialized berserk to all allies, which in PvP that is absolutely essential and is a very great feature. So for his passive skills, at the start of battle, he will reduce the attack of all enemy heroes by 30% for 1 round. And he also grants 35% of injury damage reduction to himself from round 2, which this injury damage reduction also reduces charge damage, so this is quite useful. If you manage to 5-star him, he will be able to reduce the attack of all enemies, and he also grants 45% of injury damage reduction to himself. And if you manage to unlock his 5-star awakening, he will be able to reduce the attack of all enemies by 40% for 2 rounds, as well as being granted 50% injury damage reduction to himself. So limit breaking him as soon as possible is very viable. So now moving towards the most anticipated feature about him, and the one that will change the overall meta of the game for a very long time, his core skills. So for his basic core effect, it will require 1 grappler and 2 espers, where he will grant 3 energy per round, and if you manage to unlock his awakening 2, he will be able to grant 1 additional energy if a ally launches follow-up per round, so units such as metalbat plus or Carnage Kabuto plus will be able to grant that additional energy. So for his advanced core, it will require 2 grapplers and 2 espers, and for his level 1 core, when any ally takes fatal damage, they will be granted specialized unyielding. This specialized unyielding ignores all damage, anti-unyielding, and replaces the regular unyielding on a unit. This unyielding effect will disappear after 4 actions of any character, where the ally will recover their HP by 100% of their max HP, which will trigger up to 2 times per character every battle. So each character in your team will be able to withstand 2 fatal blows every battle, which is absolutely insane. Now the difference when you unlock his level 4 core is that everything's basically the same, except when the specialized unyielding disappears, those allies will be recovered by 60% of their max HP, so it is a decrease. However, this unyielding feature will now be able to trigger 3 times for every character every battle instead of 2. So this is much more beneficial to have than having Geryu Plus's level 1 core, as your team will be able to unyield up to 18 times instead of 12, so that is definitely going to change the PvP game and in PvE. Then moving on to his level 10 core, it is basically the same thing as the level 1 core, where allies will be healed by 100% of their max HP and the unyielding will trigger 2 times every battle. However, there will be a new additional feature that will be granted where you'll be able to deal extra damage by 150% of the allies' attack to 3 random enemies. Whereas the level 17 core is much like the level 4 core, which will recover HP by 60% and will trigger unyielding 3 times per battle. However, the extra damage will deal 80% of the allies' attack to all enemies instead. So overall, the cores are very good in the long run. You do want to get the level 17 core eventually, but that will take a very long time. But the level 4 core is absolutely essential for PvP and for everything in general, so definitely save up to get the level 4 core as soon as possible. So the main takeaways from Geryu Plus is that he is an amazing core and you cannot skip him. He is an absolute must-have. He will change the meta for a very long time. He's even viable after Drive Knight Plus as the core that is supposed to replace Geryu Plus, but Geryu will be super essential even in PvP, where in some stances he will be overpowered and can provide more than Drive Knight Plus. He will be the main core for PvP and PvE, so there's no two ways about it, you have to pull for him. He also grants a free AoE ult, which is very neat, as everyone loves free ults, why wouldn't you? He's also a great support and utility unit, so he is very good for his specialized berserk as well as specialized unyielding. And he will be able to counter units such as metalbat, since he is able to protect these allies from death from his specialized unyielding, which will render metalbat's consecutive follow-ups pretty useless. However, the cons about it is that if you don't have the patience, you have to prepare for 5+ minute battles, so prepare for that, especially in live clash where the matches will be super long and super boring, but that will be the eventual state of the game. His keepsake is also required to be OP in PvP, so if you want to be the best of the best in PvP, you definitely need to pull for his keepsake in order to provide specialized berserk to every ally. And finally, his level 4 core is better than the core you get on his debut, so it will take time to gather the vouchers to unlock the parts for his level 4 core, but definitely save for his level 4 core whenever he does come out. So should you pull for Geryuganshoop? Yes, every person in this game should be pulling for him. However, for free-to-play, low spenders and mid spenders, you don't need to pull for his keepsake or awaken to him at all. So you just need to pull for him, as he is the next essential SSR plus character and core character, and especially for your villain side. But for high spenders, you definitely want to pull for him with his keepsake and to awaken to him in order to be the top of the top in the PvP side of things. And speaking of PvP, the final character that we have is King Plus. So going through his attack skills, for his basic attack, he heals an ally's HP for 150% of his attack. And for his ultimate attack, he inflicts fear to all enemies for 1 round, which will seal 2 energy. He also reduces the resilience and tenacity of the 3 highest max HP enemies to 40% of the shield's original value. His ultimate also restores HP of 2 allies with the lowest HP ratio by 300% of their own attack. So his healing will be very useful in PvP. As well as this, his ult requires 0 energy to activate, much like Geryuganshoop. So this is super handy, especially for free healing. Why wouldn't you want free healing? And if you manage to unlock his keepsake, you will be able to unlock his ultra ultimate attack, where he will be able to seal 3 energy instead of 2, and he will reduce the resilience / tenacity shields of all enemies to 40% of its original value, and he will be able to heal 4 allies instead of 2. So in PvP, he is absolutely essential. He is a great healing character. He has so many healing benefits, so you definitely want to pull for him. So for his passive skill, he increases the speed of the allies in the same row by 90% of King's speed. And much like Sonic V2, his speed boost is active even if King is dead, so this is very good. If you manage to 5-star him, he will gain the additional buff where at the start of the battle he will increase his own speed by 16%. And if you manage to 5-star awaken him, he will be able to increase the speed of allies in the same row by 95% of King's speed, and he'll also be able to increase his own speed by an additional 20%. And for his awakened passive, at the start of battle, he will be able to summon 1 drone, where this drone inherits attack by 100% of King's basic attack, as well as inherits HP by 800% of King's attack. This drone will be able to absorb 90% of all types of damage received by King until its HP is 1. And after any character's action, the drone deals damage to 1 random enemy, which deals 350% of King's attack, which can trigger up to 2 times per round. And if you manage to awaken to him, he'll be able to have 2 drones instead of 1, which do the exact same thing. So going through his pros and cons about him, his pros that he is a great support unit as he heals his allies for free. He is basically a SSR Amai but on absolute steroids. So in PvP and in hero side, he is an amazing character. He will also be the fastest unit in the game compared to Sonic V2, due to the Awakening Speed Boost upgrade, where when you awaken to King, you gain an additional speed boost. So that is why he is a faster unit than Sonic V2. So for the heavy PvP players, you have to pull for King. He also grants a free AoE ultimate, which doesn't deal damage, but it does heal a lot of your team, so you definitely have an advantage over people there. He is also a great Esper for Geryu Plus's core, especially in PvP, so you definitely want to use King alongside Geryu Plus instead of Espers such as Boros Plus. And finally, he will be able to reduce the enemy shields, which will also be pretty useful against bombed shields if you are fighting against someone with shields or tenacity. Otherwise, the cons about him that he does require massive investment with about 500 plus sacks. That is because he needs speed on every single gear, so you need to put a lot of Star Ascension cards into those gears. His keepsake is also mandatory in order to be beneficial in PvP and to stay on the top of the top. In the future, he will also be countered by units such as Flashy Flash Plus, as he will be able to remove acceleration of units, which I will go over in the next video. And finally, if Global is following the release schedule of what happened in the Southeast Asian servers, King won't be put in the monthly banner, but will be locked behind the Awaken Wheel, which is a pay-to-win feature which will require 27,000 gems or 2,600 funds, so I would definitely not recommend pulling for him for most players since he is behind a pretty expensive paywall. So, should you pull for King? For free-to-play, low spenders and mid spenders, I would highly recommend not to do so if he is scheduled to be in the Awaken Wheel, like in the Southeast Asian servers. Otherwise, even if he is released as a monthly banner, I would still recommend to not pull for him since he is a heavily PvP invested character. But for the high spenders out there, you will need to pull for King with his keepsake, and if you want to be the top of the top on the PvP leaderboards, then you have to pull for his Awakening 2 in order to outspeed those very fast Sonic V2 users. So overall, I would recommend all types of players to pull for Carnage Kabuto and Geryuganshoop, as they'll be very useful for all features for a very long time. Now for metalbat, most free-to-play and low spenders will have to decide between metalbat and Atomic Samurai if they don't have enough back tickets to get both of them, which I would recommend pulling for Atomic Samurai over metalbat, which will all be explained why within my next SSR Plus detail video. Otherwise, if you do have enough black tickets to get both of them, then you can pull for metalbat, or you can wait for future SSR Plus characters to use those black tickets on. For mid spenders, I would recommend to get an additional character between Childemperor or Boros if you would like to, or you can save your black tickets for the future SSR Plus characters. And to all my high spenders, you can buy your way to get King, who will be essential for PvP in order to have the edge over those fast Sonic V2 players. And a message that I do have for everyone is that I would recommend to not awaken Bakuzan and save your evolution materials for another future monster SSR Plus character. Or you can use those monster materials to unlock the second awakening of a monster character, so the decision will be left entirely up to you, as you can decide by watching my videos or by joining my Discord server and asking about your opinions over there and see how the community feels about it. And that wraps up the end of the video. It would be greatly appreciated if you could subscribe to my channel and turn on the notification bell in order to stay updated on everything you need to know about One Punch Man the Strongest. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like and a comment down below about any questions you have, and join my Discord server to stay updated with everything, and I will catch you all next time.